Maris, thank you so much for joining us today to talk about Jeannette, an intimate look into the life of Jeannette Feliciano, a queer Puerto Rican single mother and competitive bodybuilder, as she continues living through the daily trauma of her experiences as a survivor of the Orlando Pulse nightclub massacre in 2016. How are you today?
I'm doing really well. Thank you for having me.
Very excited to chat with you, especially as you're getting ready to get on the road for the big world premiere of the film at the San Francisco International Film Festival this weekend. Delighted to talk to you about this. I found the film really impactful. It's an important human film, and it really brings me back to that morning waking up on the East Coast, hearing about it, what was happening with Pulse, and then learning the stories of the individuals after. So I guess to start us off, how did you first become aware of Jeannette, meet Jeannette, and get involved with this project?
So I also had that experience that you did of, I think I was, because I'm on the West Coast, I was still awake when the news was unfolding. And I just remember having this very visceral feeling of, I could have been there, right? That, if Orlando was my home, I could have been out that night, and so could have my friends. And just, it really struck a chord. So I had an opportunity to do a piece in the aftermath of Pulse that was an anti-discrimination campaign. That was a campaign that was called Love is Love, and Jeannette was cast. And it was a short documentary about her kind of promoting this message of fighting hate. And I did a pre-interview with her before going to Orlando and meeting her. And as is too common, it was the morning after another mass shooting. And obviously, having lived through something like that, it's extremely triggering to have these headlines. And so I had sent her a note saying, we don't have to talk this morning, but also we can create space and don't have to have a pre-production call. We can talk. And she took me up on that, and we ended up speaking for almost 2 hours, and really connected, first on the phone, and then about a week later when I was there shooting. And it was meant to be a one-day shoot that was for a very specific purpose. And about a week after shooting, I called Jeannette again and, said I wanted to follow up and see how you were, see how that shoot felt for you. I had this kind of feeling that the seeds had been planted to do something much bigger. Yeah. And I think that she also had felt that. And that had a lot to do with kind of the personal connection that we had. And that in our own very different ways, a lot of the work that each of us is doing, me as a filmmaker and her as a trainer, is about trying to combat violence.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's clear from the film that Jeannette is still battling a lot of that trauma day in and day out. And you mentioned her work as a trainer, and especially those boot camps, and working with the individuals that come there and sharing her own story, and the rest of the team sharing their story, all the way up to even the prep for her bodybuilding competition. It really seems like she has found an outlet there. What was it like for you as a filmmaker to be there and to see Jeannette in these raw moments?
I mean, I think number one, it's inspiring. I mean, I think that she is a very motivational person, and she does inspire me. And it's in these both in these moments where she's doing the work of inspiration, but also for me, some of those moments when I get most inspired are the quieter moments. Particularly with her son, because I think she's an amazing mother, and a mother unlike one we see often, particularly on screen, an unconventional mother, deeply loving, deeply committed. But to go back to your question, it's also wild, right? It's very, I am a person who likes working out and moving my body, but not in such extreme ways as you see in the film. And, I remember talking to my cinematographer, and we were, I think, picking what we were going to have for dinner after the day of shooting boot camp. And I was like, I don't know, I think we should have a salad. And
right.
he had kind of the reverse he said, no, I think we should have a cheeseburger. Really, really funny. But it's amazing because exactly what you said, she's using this trauma, the trauma of her life, and transforming it into a force for good, and a way, kind of an example to say, look, can you also transform your life? And these are the tools that I have, right? She knows so much about fitness and the body. She's a personal trainer, she's a coach, and kind of giving this offering to her community and saying, let's transform together. And I think that that's unbelievably powerful.
It's amazing to have that perspective check as someone who is lucky enough to not have lived through such a traumatic experience, to see someone who has take that pain and utilize it to help others, and in turn to help herself. It was quite impressive. I had a different reaction than you guys. Well, maybe a similar one when they were flipping the tires and everyone was clapping around them. I would have hated that. I like to work out in my own corner. Like, nobody look at me. But it is quite incredible. And I think even just seeing the diversity amongst those that were at the boot camp, that was very encouraging as well, and great to see. One of the things that struck me about Pulse in general, and this is touched on a little bit in the film, is that while this was certainly an attack on the LGBTQIA community, more specifically, it was an attack on the Latino community within the LGBTQIA community, as it was Latin Night. Do you think that this is a piece that's forgotten, and that needs to be a focus?
I mean, I think that it's about this kind of nexus, right, of who happened to be there. And I think that the community that it hit the hardest is Jeannette's community. And it's particularly, like, for her specifically, it's about like queer Puerto Ricans also. And I'm not saying that all of the people affected were, but in her world, that is largely who it impacted. We actually had this unbelievable experience where, when we were in Puerto Rico after Hurricane Maria, we happened to be talking to somebody one day as we were shooting, and the person's cousin had died at Pulse. And it was just showing how kind of small that world is. Yeah. I do think that element is forgotten, and I do think that it should be brought up. And I think that it also raises this question that is kind of an intrinsic question in the film, which is, how do we keep each other safe? How do we build a world where, Pulse was a safe space? And I think that the fact that it was this space where people could feel free, where people didn't feel judged, where this community could come together and let down their guard, is really important. And so I think one question that I take, and one question that the film asks, is, okay, so now how can we be safe, and how can we together in community work towards having more safety, and work towards greater support for one another?
And Jeannette touches on that later on in the film. She mentions how her safe spaces have been taken from her, whether that's her upbringing and her family, or the experience at Pulse, was really tragic. Someone else that you speak with in the film is Mike. And I believe it's he who made the comments that one day they're running from bullets, and they're back to life the next. The bills keep coming. They don't stop. And then it seemed like nobody really cared. It also seems like those, rightfully so, who are in that experience at Orlando's Pulse nightclub have formed their own community, sort of supporting one another. Did you see a lack of support in terms of, or do you see a lack of support in terms of Pulse in particular? And then I guess building upon what you just mentioned a moment ago, is there anything that you learned that we can do better to support individuals after such tragedies?
That was Easy, her friend in the film.
I'm sorry, yes.
I mean, I think that it's such a big question. And I think that the film kind of starts to answer that question in a very micro way, right? Of how within one woman's life can you build support? And I think that Jeannette has taken on a lot for herself of how can she be that support? But then who's supporting her, right? And so the film kind of looks at that. So I think it's about checking in with people. Number one, that, trauma doesn't last for the length of benefits that people get maybe in the wake of a tragedy. It doesn't last for as long as headlines are relevant. It's something that is with you for a lifetime. And so I think, number one, there need to be greater mental health services for survivors and for those impacted. I think that speaks to a broader healthcare issue, that we need stronger healthcare for everyone.
Absolutely.
And I think that there also is kind of there's the systemic kind of side of it, but there's also the personal side of it, which is working to having communities that are tighter knit, where people aren't falling through the cracks. Because I think that we need to check in on one another. We need to be able to have people not always be strong after surviving such horrific, unfortunately, daily occurrences like this.
It feels like we put a lot of the onus on those survivors after the initial response to get the help that they need, and then that help isn't there, and it's continuously frustrating. I think even your experience in first going to speak with Jeannette, and it was in the midst of yet another tragedy, it just shows part of the problem. One of the dynamics that plays out on screen is between Jeannette and her mother. And her mother moved in after the shooting, and Jeannette is very honest in stating that there's always been a disconnect with her mother when it comes to her sexuality. And she later even openly says that she wants to make sure that she gives her son, Anthony, what she never had: acceptance and encouragement to follow his dreams and become who he wants to be. And that struck me, because she was saying that in front of her mother. Even in your time with Jeannette and her family, did you see a change in that dynamic, or at least an understanding between the two?
I did. And I actually just went back to Orlando to be with them. And she has a wonderful new partner. And I walked in and hugged her, and she was saying something, and she said, "Oh, mommy, I was just with mommy." And to hear that Maylee and her mom have such a great relationship, I mean, it like brought tears to my eyes. But I was talking to Jeannette yesterday, actually, and she told me something that she hadn't told me at the time, which was that in watching the film, she realized how much her mother loves her. And I think that actually in watching the film, you can see a growth in that relationship. And I think that it was a real wake-up call also for her mother to see Jeannette as her vulnerabilities in the wake of Pulse, and to feel really needed, and for Jeannette to make the space then to let her mother comfort her and care for her. And I think you can see that growth in the film. And it was really profound for me to hear Jeannette talk about that, also in relationship to the process of making the film and then watching it.
That's great. I mean, it's such a gift for Jeannette and her family as well. I was really struck by that last conversation. I think it was the honesty with which Jeannette was speaking, but also the attentiveness from her mother, who was listening and hearing her. It really struck me.
Not arguing with her.
Right.
Yeah.
It was really interesting, because I just think about what we haven't seen on screen, right? The previous years of Jeannette's life and the upbringing and the challenges that she references. To be able to be at a place where you can have that conversation open and honestly, I think is remarkable to see on screen, and could help a lot of people to see that that's a conversation that you can have and you can work towards that. For you in particular, this is a different film for you. It's a documentary, coming off of 5 Nights in Maine. Is there a different approach that you take to making a film like this? And as a filmmaker, how does this type of film impact you?
It's a different approach. Between the two films, I made 2 short documentaries that were amazing experiences to make and felt very creatively freeing. I think that I'm drawn not only to the kind of the subject matter, but also to kind of pushing the form in the documentary space. And I feel like there's a lot of flexibility to do that, that has felt really creatively inspiring to me. And that there can be an immediacy working in the documentary space that you don't always have working narratively. The flip side is that funding is still very hard, and that the edit is it's working on a film like this. There's a lot that goes into cutting a film like this, but I found making this film really energizing, really exciting. It felt like the type of film that I want to be making and also want to be watching. I don't feel like we get to see Jeannette on screen very often, and that is that's inspiring to me. She is inspiring to me.
Certainly an inspiring individual, and it would be interesting to continue to follow her story and see how she continues to work through said trauma. Maybe take one of her classes, which I would never do, just to be clear. What do you take away from this experience? You know, you mentioned Jeannette is inspiring. She's strong. She's resilient. How does this impact you as a person?
I mean, I think that there's growth as a filmmaker, as a human. I think that one element of making this film that was really unexpected for me was how much the film is about motherhood. And going into the project, I knew that Jeannette was a mother, and I knew that she had a fraught relationship with her mother. But I didn't know that motherhood was going to be the center of the film. And I also didn't know that I was going to become a mother while making the film. And I think that it's also been, as like for Jeannette and Maris, the humans who are friends, it was also a really great opportunity to talk about motherhood and raising boys. We both have sons, and that was an unexpected gift, and something that I think also has really bonded us, among many other things. And I think that there's also being kind of brought in and incorporated into Jeannette's world, that I have, my friendships are not just with Jeannette, it's with her family, and her friends have been incredible and rallied behind the film, and there's a screening of the film in a week in Miami, and they're driving from Orlando to Miami. And I mean, it really feels like, when people say it takes a village to make a film, it really feels like that. And it feels like we have the support of her community kind of rallying behind, just as you saw her community rallying behind her during the competition. And I find that really moving. Really. I
was going to say, when she was at her competition and they realized that she was getting first, and the camera panned over to them, it was very heartwarming to see that support, and just goes to show the relationships that she's built. It's incredible. Absolutely incredible. What's next for you as a filmmaker? You're like, I'm a mother now, so.
No, I mean, I'm really excited. I'm really excited to make a new film, and I'm in early development. I think that the combination of the pandemic and having a baby certainly has me looking to work a little closer to home, and kind of mining the world around me in terms of the stories that I really want to tell. And so I'm in that process of, developing more than one idea that hopefully I can work on here to shine a light on stories that I care really deeply about.
That's excellent. And I thank you for doing that with not only Orlando's Pulse Nightclub massacre, but Jeannette in particular, because I think that the individuals involved often get lost in the overall telling of what happened. So it's really a remarkable documentary. I said it's incredibly impactful, and I really wish you the best at the film festival this weekend, the world premiere. Enjoy it and enjoy the little guy. Wish you all the best moving forward.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Thank you.